Yeah,
All
and
right.
all your great content.
Thank you, Fred. And look, thanks for inviting me to do this too. I love talking about this stuff. I love um, helping agencies, freelancers, brands, but particularly agencies. That's where I've been playing for the last 13 odd years, and I just love it. So thanks for having me. Just for those that don't know me, I hate talking about myself, but just briefly, just to put this in context of why Fred asked me along. Um, I know AdWords pretty well. I've been doing it for a long time. Co-wrote the book with Perry, which apparently has sold about 100,000 copies now. Most of those, nothing to do with me, but that's the four editions combined have done that. I came along on the last one, and we've just finished writing the fifth edition, which should come out later on this year, I believe, October, November, I think. Um, Speak all over the place. Traffic and conversion was the last one a couple of weeks or a few weeks ago over in San Diego. Very nervous speaker, but I love it. I love meeting everybody and getting ideas from people, which has led to me doing a whole bunch of wonderful things. First and foremost, I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'd prefer to be playing with Play-Doh with my kids than doing pretty much anything else. So that's me. I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot. What I do want to talk about is systems and why people don't do them. Um, because you're probably thinking this, right? That systems, creating systems, documenting systems, yeah, that would be nice, but there's a whole bunch of reasons why I'm not going to do that. And the first is, particularly in the game that we're all in, that Google changes all the bloody time. Why would I document something when they're going to turn around and change it again and again and again and again? What's the point in having this lovely thing that tells someone how to do it today when in 6 months' time half of that system is going to be broken? Or if you run the agency, you might be thinking it's lovely to have it, but my staff won't use it. Or if you're thinking that you are the one that's needing to create all of these systems, this is the big one that comes up a lot. I just don't have the time to go create those systems. So what I want to do before we talk about the nitty gritty of systems is I just want to sell you a little bit here on the need for systems, really, and why systems are so wonderful. And let me put this in context. Let me tell you a little bit of backstory here. A mate of mine handed me this book. It's kind of a small business Bible, the E-Myth, 1999, as I was starting my first business. And that business was successful and grew, and I sold it 18 months later because it was systemized, because I had systems for everything. I worked about a dozen days in that business. It was an internet cafe in New Zealand. Um, had it for 18 months, worked about a dozen shifts because of this book. Started this agency, I don't know, 2006, 2007, somewhere around there. We'd been running for 2, 3 years, and I had hired one guy, and we were just about to hire team members 2 and 3. And I realized one day that I hadn't applied any of this knowledge from eMyth. I'd actually been an eMyth coach in the intervening years, gone and trained with Gerber and his team in California. It's a whole different story there. We won't go into that. Flew to America at 2 days' notice and paid Gerber a ton of money to become an eMyth coach and help other people systemize their businesses, because I'm a huge believer in this, but I hadn't applied it to my own business for a whole bunch of reasons. And the wheels were starting to come off. And I sat down and read it and went, oh shit, I need to drink the Kool-Aid here. I need to do what I'm telling everybody else to do what I supposedly know to do, and start to systemize my business. And it was around about this time that I also read this book, which I highly recommend you grab a copy of, Atul Gawande's book, The Checklist Manifesto. And in here, he has a whole bunch of stories, but particularly around two industries, medical and aviation. And it tells about these doctors that were so resistant to having anything systemized, to having checklists for anything. And yet, when they finally did, the improvements that it made by having these checklists, super simple checklists, huge improvements to all sorts of things, not least less people dying on the operating table, which is fairly important. I used to fly a bit back in the day. As a kid, I always wanted to be a helicopter pilot, so I went and worked for a helicopter company for a while. Did a little bit of flying, but not much. But my chief pilot back in that helicopter company, with 11,000 hours flying helicopters in the Army, every single time he got into that helicopter, he would run the pre-flight checklist. Even though he knew exactly what he was doing, and he's only going up for a 20-minute flight, he would still go through the pre-flight checklist every single time. And this book reminded me of that and the need for systems. Even when you've got smart people doing stuff that they're used to doing, having the right kind of checklist is really, really important. For us as agencies, for you, the big promise really is consistent results. So that it doesn't matter which person in the agency gets assigned that particular client, you know that the results are going to be good and they're going to be consistent over time. And the huge benefit of that, obviously, is that we get our clients to that sweet spot faster. And I'm guessing, because most people here have been doing agency stuff for 5 years plus, you know exactly what I mean by this, but that point where they stop hassling you, they give you a bit of leeway, they're not riding you back and checking the change history every 3 minutes. The trust is built up, the results are there, they can see that you know what you're doing, they back off a little bit and just let us do what we're all good at doing. And once we get to that point, you know, the emotional bank account is built up and they're going to be a client for years and years after that. If it takes a long time to get to that point, or if occasionally you don't get them to that point, then obviously that's when you're churning clients. And that's probably one of the reasons that a lot of people have said, you know, finding and getting new clients is because there's a churn problem, because we're losing clients out the other end. So we'll address that in the third webinar in this series and talk more about getting it and keeping clients. Huge part of this, another benefit, is happier teams. So if you're owning an agency or if you're managing a team within the agency, for your team to see those consistent results, to have the benefit of all of this work with the systems, they're much happier, they're much more confident in the work that they're doing. It's a great training resource as you hire new people, as you grow the team. Now you've actually got a system for bringing those new guys on, training them up. They know exactly what they're doing instead of the usual ad hoc, oh, are you starting today? Yeah, let me jump on this computer over here. Let me find something. So many businesses start new employees like that. I'm going to talk a bit more about creativity later, and luckily it's 6 in the morning here in Australia, so my team aren't in yet, and they won't get to tease me about this because I bang on about the robots coming all the time, but I will talk a little bit about that later, and creativity. But the right systems, used the right way, just take care of all of that mundane stuff, for want of a better word, and free you up for the really important stuff, the creative stuff, which again means that you're providing the most value, the best value. Your team aren't bored. They get to play with the new stuff and experiment and be creative. And you've got systems for the other stuff. You're not reinventing the wheel all the time. And I don't know if you own the business that you're working in, but if you do, then a super important one is it adds value to the business. That first business that I had, I've built and sold 3 businesses to this point. I'm currently working on 4 and 5. That first business I sold in 4 days because it was so systemized, because I was able to hand the manual over to the guy and say, this is how we do it here. Everything's there. So 4 days, and my accountant pulled me aside and said, you know, it's never going to be this easy again, don't you? This is never going to happen again. He was wrong. And this is a Seth Godin line. I love this one, that you can't optimize what you don't ship. In other words, until it's done, until it's written down, until it's documented, it isn't a system. And you can't improve it because you're making it up every time. As soon as you write it down, as soon as you've got a documented system, it's now so easy just to go, step number 6 has changed, or actually we need something else between step 6 and step 7. We just need to put this bit in here. And now you optimize it. And it gets better and better and better. And I'll show you the system for that, the system for systems of continually improving the systems inside your business. But before we get to all the good bits, damning omissions first, because I think you can probably learn more from how I've screwed up than me telling you how we do stuff now, because I really have screwed up in this area. This is what I did when I sat down and read eMyth again and read Checklist Manifesto again. I hired the wonderful Emily, and she came in and helped me create over 500 systems. This photo that you're looking at is a 12 pages of A4 that we had stuck to the wall. Each line on there, by the way, is the title of a system. These were all of the systems that Em and I created. It took us about 6 months to do so. Wasted 50 grand. And it was a waste because people couldn't find them. There was no structure to this. We had everything documented in way too much detail, which is why it took so long to do, with no structure, like I said, no hierarchy to this. And it was a huge waste of time and money, so please don't do that. Then we built an internal wiki, and we put everything in here thinking that would be better. Now we've got some structure to it. But it was so hard for people to create new systems. Didn't really get used. So then the pendulum swung the other way, and we went super simple. Text files in Dropbox. So the Dropbox folder, folders within folders, within folders, within folders, and text files, which was okay. Again, you can see there's a lot of systems in there, and it was just too easy to delete stuff. But anybody could change a file because it's a text file. There was no permissions, there was no rules. It was just someone could come in and change something completely with nobody else would know who's changed it, when it was changed, if it's up to date. There was no way of keeping track of the whole thing. It worked okay for a while, but it certainly wasn't the best system. And this is a distinction that I got from Checklist Manifesto, and my mate Tim Francis, in chatting with him, this became really clear. And it was the distinction between these two types of checklist, what Atul Gawande calls a read-do checklist and a do-confirm checklist. When we first did this, those 500 systems that I did with them, they were all read-do checklists. In other words, read this step, do it, read this step, do it, read this step, do it. And they were super detailed. And I think 5 years ago, that wasn't a terrible thing, other than the fact we just went nuts with it and did too much. In this day and age, and I am gonna talk about the robots occasionally here, but a lot of that stuff, if you can write it out to that level of detail, where somebody just, with what Sam Carpenter wrote a great book called Work the System, and he talked about this thing called off-the-street systems. Could you hire someone off the street, hand them this piece of paper, and they would be able to follow the system? And that's a read-do checklist. Someone with virtually no training could follow the checklist and get the thing done. I think where we're heading with all of the AI machine learning stuff, and Google obviously is an AI first company now. Well, I suppose they've really always been, but now they've outed themselves as an AI first company. If you can write it to that level of detail, it can probably be automated. And I'll talk about automation a bit more later. So what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this, and what I would urge you to focus on, is what Gawande calls a do-confirm checklist. Think of it more as the experts checklist rather than the rank beginners checklist. You do the job, and then you look at the checklist to confirm that, yep, I've done boom, 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 and I've got this result. Great, carry on. So you're not spending hours or even multiple minutes inside the checklist. You're really just using it as a confirmation that you've done the right things. If you can see this, then you've done it the right way. Bang, bang, bang. Great, I'm heading in the right direction. Because where we're heading, I firmly believe, is smart people working with smart machines. And if you're hiring smart people, and hopefully you're hiring smart people, and hopefully in your agencies you're surrounded by other smart people, there's a lot of thinking involved, there's strategy involved, and that cannot be completely systemized, cannot be checklisted. Now there's a bunch of stuff that you can, because that's one of the objections that always comes up. When I was an eMyth coach, I worked with a sign company, and they said, but we're a creative, we create signs, that you can't systemize anything inside of our business. We make it up every day. I'm like, well, no, you create the sign, you make that bit up, but 80% of the business runs the same every day, and that's the bit that we need to systemize so that you're not running around like headless chooks reinventing the thing. So do confirm checklists. think of it just as a short list of bullet points. No screenshots, doesn't need to be huge and fancy, and we'll talk about different ways you can do that. So continuing with the mistakes, this is airing all the dirty laundry. Then we moved, this is based on a suggestion by my mate Tim Francis. We moved to a Google Doc, and everything was categorized and systemized. And the huge problem with this was that it was just way too hard for people to create new systems. It was great, and we, team sat down and banged out about 50 core systems, and that's good, and they get used. And with our, we don't have many guys overseas. Most of us are here in Melbourne in the agency, but we've got a few guys overseas helping with various bits and pieces. They're wonderful people, very smart. Most of them ex-Google. And the training for them and the stuff that they're doing is all being used. But inside the office, creating new systems with this system just didn't work. And so we've ended up eventually last year finding this. This is actually built, full disclosure, built by a mate of mine, but systemhub.com is designed just to create and document systems. It doesn't try and do workflow management, doesn't try and do project management, understands that Asana and other things, Podio, are better for that stuff. This is just to organize your systems, to document your systems. So we love this, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The tool itself doesn't matter, whatever works for you. If putting it in Podio, putting it in Asana, putting it in Trello, if that works for you, awesome. What I really want to do today is give you that framework of how to think about systems and urge you to systemize more, rather than just sort of like hand you a whole bunch of, this is how you systemize an AdWords agency, step 1, step 2, step 3, because I don't believe that's really going to help. So let's start with the end in mind. And I'll just show you a couple of quick examples. This is by Afan, who's in Karachi, I believe. He's a member of my agency savvy group, and when I told everybody I was talking with Fred about systems, he volunteered a couple of his systems to be used. Now this is sort of the more detailed screenshots type approach. If that works for you, if you're working with a whole bunch of new people that are very new to AdWords and you need to get them to do things like set up call tracking, then you may need this level of detail. Another one of his systems that he shared with me was in Excel. So you can see all of the steps here of launching a new campaign. Don't worry, if you want the slides, I'm happy to share the slides. You don't have to manically screenshot that. I'm happy to give you the slides afterwards if you want. We can make those available. Lucid charts. I'm a big fan of lucid charts, but you don't need to chart everything out to create a system. But again, if that works for you, go for it. This is from my mate Ralph at Dominate Web Media. They're a Facebook agency, one of the best Facebook agencies in the world, I think. This is a Word document that his team have to go through when they're creating new audiences in Facebook. He's systemized his entire agency and done a fantastic job of it. And then this is a system actually inside of System Hub. A mate of mine, Troy Deans, and this is his system for podcasting. And super, super detailed, again, for his offshore team to be able to edit and post the recording. So just a few examples of different ways of doing it. This is my AdWords audit. I'll explain how you can get the full version of this if that's helpful for you, because I don't know about you, but we do a lot of audits. I imagine that you do too inside of your agency. For years and years and years, I was reinventing the wheel. And one day I just went, this is bloody stupid. I'm doing these all the time. And every time I just sit down and stare at the account and I find stuff to talk about. I mean, there's always more that can be done inside of an AdWords account, right? But I was just had no system for it. And one day I just had jack of this and sat down and went, right, I'm creating the system to do this. And so I broke it down into about 20, 25 different areas, a whole bunch of questions that I asked myself on the way through. And that led us to create the checklist inside of Podio. We run the agency on Podio. And so just by putting that checklist into Podio, and then now anybody in the agency knows how to do it and can go through and audit a new account and can put all of the information that we need into Podio to then write up a report, create the video, or create a proposal and go sell that prospect on all the things that we can do for them. So hopefully I've started to sell you on the fact that systems are reasonably important and are needed, but where to start? So I'm going to start with the helicopter view, big picture to begin with. You've probably heard this saying before: the best time to plant an oak tree was 100 years ago. The second best time to plant an oak tree is today. So that's my plea, is that you start to think about systems or improving your existing systems, because I think many people here have already got a bunch of systems, are already doing this to some degree, but to start thinking about a system for systems, or how are we going to tighten this up a little bit and improve this moving forward. I would urge you to start that as soon as possible, preferably today. Who should be creating the systems? Well, not the CEO. CEO is the worst person in the world to be creating systems. Hasn't got that level of detail, probably doesn't really know what's going on anymore, kind of used to know, but not anymore. The team are the people that you want creating the systems. So a system for systems, so that the team can follow that, and the right place for that to go. And let's make it easy, because if it's not easy for people to in your organization to create the systems, then it's never going to happen. And if we're talking about systems, let's just define really what we're talking about, because there's this huge hype at the moment, and some of it's founded, I reckon, but a lot of hype at the moment about the robots are coming and they're going to take all of our jobs, and we're going to need to pay everybody universal basic income because everyone will be sitting around doing nothing. My belief is that robots are going to take some of the tasks away from us. They're not going to replace, certainly in our industry, entire jobs. Yes, they're going to replace some jobs like truck drivers and taxi drivers, but they're going to replace part of the job for the most part. They're going to replace certain tasks, and they're going to replace more and more and more over time. But where do we start? And so this has led to me creating this thing I call the task stack. Now, it's the first time I've ever shared this, other than with my team, who kind of look at me weirdly when I talk about this stuff. So I would be very interested to get your feedback, to see if this works, to see if this helps you sort of picture what you do. I've never shared this publicly before, so world exclusive, whoop-de-doo. Picture what you do as this box. This is everything that you do day to day, week to week, month to month. And I'm going to split it into three main buckets, three main areas. I think there's a chunk of stuff that you do that only you can do, or certainly only someone with your high level of expertise, experience, training can do. Sure, other people might be able to do them, but they're equally expensive, they're equally rare, equally talented. If you're honest with yourself, there's probably a chunk of stuff that you do that somebody with less experience, maybe less skill. I'm not saying this has to be someone in another country or somebody that has to get paid $4 an hour. It could be a junior in the office. It could be an intern. It could be just someone that's been doing this for a year instead of for 7 years. But someone with less skill, less expertise, less experience than you could be doing a chunk of stuff that's currently on your plate, and you'd love to get rid of it. You're just not sure how. And we'll talk about team and delegation and so on in a couple of weeks when we do the second part of this series. And then there's probably a chunk of stuff that you're currently doing, or maybe that other members of your team are doing, that could be automated. It's not necessary that it should be immediately today, but it could be automated. A machine these days could be doing that, and I believe that chunk, that bucket, is going to grow pretty quickly. So let's just do a couple of quick examples with this, just to make this a little bit clearer. The high level experience, the person at the top here, or the tasks at the top of your stack, are working out how to use something like Optmyzr, or how to use AdWords scripts? What could we automate of the stuff that we're doing? That next tier down is then probably doing the bulk of that work, working through the Optmyzr workflows, or running the script, or looking at the output from that script and making those slightly lower level decisions based on that. The script, you've worked out the strategy, you've done the 20% that gets you 80% of the way there. Someone else has then gone and built the script or done the stuff with Optmyzr, whatever it might be. And then that automation obviously is the script or the tool itself, something like Optmyzr, something like an AdWords script that does a lot of that work, whether that's building out a campaign or helping with reporting, labeling a whole bunch of entities inside your AdWords account. Another way to think about this, and this was pointed out to me by an SEO mate when I was chatting to him about this webinar over lunch the other day, he said that's a bit like Google. Something comes out like buying links or link farms or something, Google, the first thing Google do is to say, we don't like this. And they might say that publicly, and they might say that for a very long time, but they don't really do a whole lot about it. That's the high level bit. Then it gets documented and it goes into those quality guidelines that get leaked every so often, that the SEO guys love to share on blogs and so on. And then eventually they slam the hammer down and they automate the whole thing, and they knock out a whole bunch of people from the SERPs for doing this thing that all this time they said they didn't like but hadn't done anything about until now, and then bang, they're all gone. So it's kind of the same way. It comes sort of from the top down in a very similar fashion. Now, the point of all of this is that basically the robots are coming up from the bottom. Through that automation, that middle chunk will get automated, I firmly believe. With the way that the AI and machine learning stuff is going, and Google had some amazing announcements about DeepMind over the last couple of days. The AlphaGo machine, I love that story of the DeepMind beating the world champ at AlphaGo last year. They've just started another 3-match series with the current world champion, who's 19, by the way, the Grandmaster. It's bloody amazing. They're now playing so much better than they were before, because they're using the games that the computer played against themselves to train the new machine how to play the game even better, which is just meta and does your head in. Using 1/10 of the processing power, it runs on 1 TPU board. It's crazy. Computers are pretty bloody smart, and DeepMind now runs all the bidding inside of Google. All of the announcements we had about machine learning and DDA and attribution yesterday at Google I/O. Fred was there. We might talk about more of that later when we get to the end in the Q&A. They're going to be doing a whole bunch of these tasks. So what do you need to do about that? Well, you've got to stop doing them. Firstly, got to figure out, I need to get this stuff off my plate, and that needs to be systemized. And it is far, far easier to think about the automation piece once you've done the middle bit. So once you've trained somebody else, say in your office, once you've taught an intern to do this, it's much easier to go from that step to code, to paying someone to write an AdWords script, or working out what and how you're going to use Optmyzr, say, to free you up to do more of that stuff at the top, the stuff that you are great at, the stuff that computers won't be able to do, at least not for a while yet, and be able to do more of that, the relationship stuff with clients, the strategy and creativity. They're the 3 that we're doubling down on as an agency, and we've been talking about this for about the last, I'd say probably 2 years, maybe 2.5 years inside the agency. RCA and automation is part of that, but relationship, strategy, working out what to automate, and then the bit I left off that for a bit too long, but have since added to it, is creativity. That's the stuff that I truly believe as agencies we need to be focusing on. So this is one option. Get rid of those 2 chunks off your plate so you can do more of that bit, or start to think about the new tasks. What are the new ways that you start to add value in 2018, 2019, when computers are doing the bottom 2 things on here? What are you going to be doing? And I think we all, as an industry, need to be thinking pretty hard about that, because I think a lot of agencies, not to put too much of a dampener on this lovely Sunday morning call here, but I think a lot of agencies are going to suffer over the next 2-3 years. I think a lot of existing small agencies will be gone, because a lot of people are still trying to manage AdWords accounts the way that we did it 3, 4, 5 years ago, and doing a lot of stuff manually, and that just won't be feasible in the future. So, not to bang on about the robots, but this is, I believe, one of a super important thing that we need to be thinking about together. And by getting rid of those bottom couple of buckets, by systemizing stuff off your plate, that's going to give you the time and the freedom to be able to do that. So what are you going to systemize? I'm going to suggest, and you're going to wrinkle your nose up at this, but I'm going to suggest that you do a task audit. And so for the next 2 weeks, you stick a pen and paper on the side of your desk, and you set an alarm on your phone, and once every hour you write down the tasks that you've been doing over the last hour. Just very high level. It's going to take you 2 or 3 seconds per hour, but just to really take a look and honestly take a look at where you're spending your time. This scares a lot of people. This is actually an exercise that we would do back in the day in eMyth. As an eMyth coach, I would try and get people to do this. And Gerber's way was every 15 minutes. So I've simplified that and said, let's just do it once an hour. Just high level, where are you spending your time? Then you can start to plot those tasks on this other new thing that I've come up with called the Task Quadrant. Bit of a weird story how this came about. A few weeks ago, I was in Utah, and my Uber driver was the local fire chief, like volunteer fire chief, and we were talking about a whole bunch of things on the drive to the ski fields, snowfields, and he mentioned this video. He said, go check out Gordon Graham talking about risk management. Now, this guy is freaking hilarious, I have to say. It's 15 minutes. You may want to check it out when we get off this call, if you've got 15 minutes to spare. I found it quite fascinating, but it kind of there were a lot of parallels there for me between what he was talking about, which is life and death stuff for fireys, compared to business and systems. And so I've kind of stolen some of his ideas here and come up with this thing that I'm going to call the Task Quadrant. Left to right, we've got on the left low frequency. LF is low frequency, HF high frequency, stuff that happens a lot. Up the top, high consequence, down the bottom, low consequence. So frequency and consequence. The stuff down here, we really just don't need to worry about. Stuff that doesn't happen very often, and when it does, there's very low impact, very low consequence of doing it wrong. So let's just take that off the table and say we don't need to worry about that yet. The stuff over here, so happens a lot, but relatively low impact, relatively low consequence, that's the stuff we want to think about automating. Now, we don't need to jump straight to that, but that's perfect stuff that can be automated. I don't know, labeling your GDN ads with size labels or something like that, or anything you can think of around labeling, anything that can be scripted inside of Google AdWords. Some mistakes here on the slides, but never mind, we'll keep going. This stuff, this quadrant, this is where great training comes in. So this is stuff that doesn't happen very often, but has very high consequence if you get it wrong. So this is what training is all about. I remember seeing a wonderful documentary with the Queen of England, talking about this. A wonderful darling, and it was all about how the military and why she was such a big believer in the military, because when the shit hits the fan, training kicks in, and that's why she was such a big proponent and believer that, and certainly all of her family have gone through the military. Training is super important for things that don't happen very often. You want that instinct essentially to kick in at that point. And lastly, there's this quadrant up here in the top corner. This is the stuff that we want to think about when we're talking about systems. Stuff that happens a lot and has a high consequence if we were to get it wrong. This is the stuff that we do not want, or do not want our teams making up as they go along, reinventing the wheel every time. This is where I want us to think about starting to systemize. You can't really systemize the stuff on the left at all. You could systemize the stuff down the bottom there, but let's have that conversation about automation another day. When we're talking systems, top right. So our HFHC, are high frequency, high consequent tasks. So we go and do the task audit, and then we scan down this list. What are these? What are the HFHC tasks on that list? And then we can break them into the buckets for the main areas of the business. And there's really only sort of these 3 or so areas for most businesses most of the time. Marketing and sales, ops, and then all the other stuff. Now, ops, as an agency, for us and possibly for you, that breaks down into things like AdWords, tracking, Facebook, landing page optimization. So you may well want to break that down like I have here inside of System Hub into those areas. This is our System Hub. So you can see, very, very simple. I'm not trying to overcomplicate things. I'm not trying to have folders inside folders inside folders, because if it's too complicated, it just won't get used. So this is the first step. If you go and use something like System Hub, and again, the tool itself doesn't matter too much. I love System Hub. I think, because it's purpose designed for this thing. I'm going to give you a deal on it a little bit later on in case you want to use it. I do realize, though, that moving to a new tool, and nobody wants another software tool, but if you don't have a good alternative in place currently, then you may want to look at it, or you just think about what you're currently using and how you might tweak that a little bit. And now go find those tasks on your audit that you did, and that stuff that happens a lot and has high consequence, and start to just add the names of those tasks into the folders. And then add your do confirm checklists for each. And you are now 95% done, or at least 80% done. Remember, that do confirm checklist could be just half a dozen bullet points. And you get your team to do this. This is not just you. Depending on where you sit in the organization, you may want to do this for your job first, systemize your bit, and then go to the boss and say, this is what I've done, give me a pay rise, and give me more interesting work, and hire me a VA to do all of this stuff that I've systemized that I want to get off my plate. Or if you're running the show, then you might get your whole team to do this, get them to do that task audit, and then collaborate over what, as a team, are high frequency events. And then this do confirm checklist, that's a key part of this. It's not going and creating, like we did originally, please don't make my mistake, of doing all these like 15-page, we used a tool called Screen Steps, I think it was, that built out these huge Word documents, and they were very pretty, and we had screenshots and arrows and boxes, and it was lovely, and it was a complete bloody waste of time. So please don't do that. And now you can celebrate, because you are most of the way there. Now, these systems will need to be tweaked, and the wonderful thing about System Hub is that you can assign an owner and a secondary owner to each system, and you can be reminded to do reviews of these systems so that they stay up to date. People using the systems can comment on there and say, hey, I think step 5 is wrong, or I think there should be another step between bullets 3 and 4 there. I think we're missing a bit. But you're most of the way there. And this is a big promise, I know, but things get a heck of a lot smoother with these systems in place. It's not quite yet the self-managing company, which Dan Sullivan of strategiccoach.com calls it, the self-managing company. That's the big promise. He says every time he mentions that phrase, everybody in the room sits up straighter and leans forward. Everybody wants a self-running company, a self-managing company. Systems are the first step. For me, this is the most important part. Where we're heading over the next year, 2, 3 years, you can now focus on higher value work. Now, again, I don't care where you sit inside the organization. If you've just joined your agency and you're 6 months in, and a year ago you were in a corporate cubicle somewhere, and now you're going, oh, this SEM stuff is pretty cool, you need to be thinking about this just as much as the guy that owns the agency or the girl that owns the agency, because the robots are coming, and a lot of this stuff is going to get automated more and more, and Google and Facebook are going to automate a heck of a lot of stuff, and look at what they're doing already. A lot of this stuff is just going to be taken off the table, so we need to be thinking about how we add value to our customers and how we move up the task stack. What are we going to be doing in terms of strategy, creativity, relationship? And I'd love to hear any ideas in the Q&A of what other things belong in that box at the top, and they're the big ones that we're focusing on. you may already have something in your agency that you're focusing on there. And the net result of all of this is your team's happier, they're better trained. Again, results. I mean, we all live and die based on results. And I know it frustrates the crap out of some of us that they hold our feet to the fire, which I personally love, and they look at CPA and, oh, it's gone from $52 last month to $54 this month. Why is that? Tell me again how you're measuring ROI on radio and TV? Yeah. But we like that, right? That we're all masochistic in that way. That we like being held to the fire. It helps with those results. And ultimately, you get more freedom. Whether that's you working inside an agency, you get more freedom. I give my team huge flexibility, huge freedom to work from home if they need to. Yesterday my daughter was singing in the school choir, so I cancelled. I only found out 3 o'clock on Wednesday because the school got that bit wrong. But okay, let's just shift some meetings around and go do the stuff that's important, right? So if you can systemize your business, that becomes a heck of a lot more possible. And freedom is really why we're doing all of this, I think. I think that's ultimately what we're all heading towards. So, as Fred said, I do a fair bit of training around this, so he's very kindly allowed me to talk about this. So I've got a bit of a deal for you too, because Fred said, look, tell people about Agency Savvy and where they can go get it. But Fred's been a wonderful mate over the years. I've really enjoyed our discussions around the nitty-gritty things of AdWords and so on, and I think Optmyzr is an absolutely wonderful tool, and we highly recommend it to everybody that we talk to, whether that's inside of Agency Savvy or wherever. But agencysavvy.com/Fred. If you go there, then you get a smoking deal on Agency Savvy.